Why does gas cost so much? It's not just Putin. It's the idiots at the NMFS, National Marine Fisheries Service, also known as NOAA, N-O-A-A, fisheries. These are the guys who issue the permits to drill. The trouble started when environmental groups sued to stop oil companies from drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, even on sites covered by existing federal oil and gas leases. They wanted to protect some obscure species that might be endangered. Biden halted all Gulf drilling, while the National Marine Fisheries Service listed any species that might be threatened. So the nerds began to count them up. For month after month, they held up all drilling permits, sending prices soaring. Finally, they came up with their answer and issued a rule limiting permits for drilling. Eureka! But there was one problem. The idiots screwed up and double counted, drastically increasing the number of endangered species and limiting drilling permits. By the time they caught the error, gas prices had already begun to spike. A bunch of Republican senators wrote the NMFS saying, agency miscalculations have restricted access to safe, secure, and reliable domestic oil and gas production through substantial, unnecessary, and arbitrary permitting delays. The senators pointed out that the delay in issuing permits was due to 3 administration-made and admitted mathematical mistakes, miscalculating the number of endangered species in the Gulf of Mexico. A 2021 final rule governing offshore gas and oil exploration was based on those faulty calculations. The senators called the miscalculation what it was, a de facto ban on new drilling, impeding domestic oil and gas investment, exploration, and production. Behind the lousy math, the agency had been taking forever to approve new permits. Some applications had been with the agency for over 100 days, whereas NMFS had historically approved applications within a couple of weeks. Was the mistake deliberate? Easy to see how the math might end up being wrong and limit leases arbitrarily. You know, they never seem to be wrong in the other direction. And with the entire country suffering from high gas prices, do we dare ask the real question? What specifically are these endangered species and how important are they? With the currently politically correct rules of environmental policing, we can't even ask this question because the requirement to protect every single species, no matter how inconsequential, including snail darters, is absolute and legally binding. You can't weigh the equities and see what's more important. Once an endangered species is threatened, you have to stop drilling and block permits immediately. And even apart from the lack of permits, who in their right mind is going to invest capital in drilling with the administration publicly committed to killing off fossil fuels? It takes years to prospect for oil offshore and years more to build a pipeline to carry it to the refineries. As Senator Ted Cruz said, when Biden said he was going to ban drilling on federal land and phase out hydrocarbons, what does that do? That dries up investment, dries up capital going into the energy sector, so you can't find the funding to build the refineries, pipelines, and do the drilling. Under Trump, it was different. That's a key reason gas prices were so much lower then. The Environmental Protection Administration, EPA, was headed under Trump by Scott Pruitt, who is my guest today. He axed dozens of regulations, of useless regulations that slowed down energy production and cost our economy jobs. His deregulatory activities were a big reason for the prosperity and low energy prices we enjoyed under Trump. But in Washington, no good deed goes unpunished, and the environmentalists closed in on him. With articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post, they pecked him to death with tiny scandals about minor nonsense. He was like Gulliver, tied down by the Lilliputians and dying a death of 1,000 cuts. After a year and a half on the job, he was forced out by the liberal media. Pruitt's sin was he insisted on looking at regulation in a broad perspective, balancing the good it might do against the harm it might inflict on the economy. For example, the liberals passed a bill protecting, quote, the waters of the United States. With a title like that, how could it not pass? But the fine print on the bill was a disaster. It provided that every single body of water in the United States would be subject to federal regulation and had to be kept pure. This didn't just include oceans or seas or lakes or rivers or even streams. It included everything north of a puddle or a bathtub. Farmers found the feds crawling over their property, looking at every little stream and trickle and imposing environmental regs on it. Or take the Clean Power Act that empowered the administration to set levels of acceptable carbon emissions for each state. But Pruitt pointed out that the technology for renewable energy was not yet sufficiently developed to meet many of these standards, and we'd end up with solar panels that didn't work on cloudy days, or wind turbines that didn't turn on calm ones. He tried to make the law more realistic, but the Green Group sued, and the matter is now before the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Biden canceled an oil and gas lease for 1 million acres in Alaska's Cook Inlet, and he canceled 2 big oil leases in the Gulf. Biden says the industry wasn't interested. But you bet the industry would have lapped up those leases. Biden saying they weren't interested is like saying that a man dying of starvation won't eat because he's on a diet.